This episode is all about rapid game design. The Innovators is a podcast dedicated to independent video game development designed for aspiring and solo game developers. I'm Spencer Coral.
I'm James Smith.
And our show provides industry insights, expert interviews, and practical advice on navigating the challenges of creating a game from the ground up. Some key topics we covered in past episodes were building playable prototypes, project management, dealing with scope creep, which links for all of those can be found in the episode's description. And you can catch our episodes or become part of the community on platforms such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or even Discord. And if you're an aspiring game developer, hello.
Hello.
And like I said at the start, this episode is all about rapid game design. So James, tell me about rapid game design.
So rapid game design is just quickly iterating on the prototype phase of development. So it's
just making fast changes. That's all it is.
Fast changes. Yeah. It's just building really quickly to make sure you get to the root, the source, the truth of what makes your game fun, and cutting out all the rest. So often you'll hear a lot of developers will get lost in their process. And we talked about that a lot. So rapid prototype, rapid design, it's all about how do we stay in our lane and build something good.
It seems weird to hear that it's about staying in the lane when, it's about just like going fast and getting things done. Because when I hear rapid game design, my first thought is just it's going to get chaotic fast.
Yes and no, right? Like the whole thing there is we talk a lot about how rapid game design is. We've talked a lot about our design in the past, right? Like all of our other stuff, planning it out, making it structured, making sure that everything is, what's the word I'm looking for? I am blinking. Anyways, structured, like, so you have a goal in mind and you can build towards that goal. Like we talk a lot about a lot of that already. However, we don't really talk about how do we do that quickly? How do we get to that point quickly? We've talked a little bit about agile, and we've talked a little bit about project management, scope management, and all of those wonderful tools to help you stay aligned with your goals. But those are just sticky notes on the wall, if you will. Unless you're actively working with them, it's really hard to achieve progress. And that's what a lot of people struggle with is they try to implement those kinds of tools and immediately hit a brick wall because they just see a massive wall of checklists and tasks, and then they open up the project and nothing has happened in 2 weeks, and then you get demotivated.
I mean, I'm assuming that comes into just maybe a it's just not experienced enough to know how to set those up.
I think it's just human nature, honestly. Because we're hardwired for the dopamine hit, right? All of our social media, stuff like that, it's all about fast in your face. Very shallow thinking, I want to say. And so that's why game design is particularly hard, because you can't just think about it on a shallow level. You have to think very deeply about how your design is coming together, your mechanics, your systems, your player experience. And that's hard to do and maintain that high level of dopamine. So you're going to run into issues of, this is a real drag, this is taking too long, my game's not fun. But that's not necessarily the case. It's just the process of doing it is not as exciting as seeing it working right away, right? Which kind of goes back to toy box method, where a lot of people who fall into the toy box trap are the ones who are chasing that shiny new dopamine hit. They're like, here's a new mechanic, here's a new sound, here's a new animation, here's another new mechanic, here's another new sound, and they're polishing systems to make them look good. And then once they have a whole bunch of them together, they don't fit well together. The game doesn't feel like it has an identity. It just feels like a mishmash of random ideas.
What separates rapid game design from this? I forgot the term you just said for it.
Yeah, like toy box, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So last time we talked about it, we talked about toy box specifically. And where it's powerful is when we combine it with things like agile development, right? We create a sprint. We said, this is what we're going to do. Anything we do in this time, we're just going to hammer away at it and mash it together and see how it works. Rapid design, right? Rapid prototyping. All of this mentality is how do we do that as quick as possible? So it's not, now we're not just assigning a goal and when do we want to get there, and allowing time to feel things out. Now we're specifically sitting down and saying, okay, what's the quickest possible route to get from A to B, right? And this is where Toybox method kind of shines, working together here with this rapid prototyping, because it's just about, I'm chasing this feeling. Something about this feels really good. I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to keep chasing this particular feeling. I'm not going to chase audio effects right now because the mechanic is not there. The system isn't there, but there's something, right? There's like a little shine, and you have to figure out what that shine is. You can't just move on because there was a little bit of it, like intrigue or whatever it is making you interested as a developer. You have to like really capture that essence and say, okay, this is the magic, this is the sauce. You gotta get into it. And yeah, so like sprint planning, agile development, Scrum, Toybox, it's all about the goal, it's all about setting a target, and then the rapid
When you say goal, because you've
prototyping.
said goal for both of them so far, I'm assuming the goal is very different for rapid game design versus all of these other ones?
Nope, still the same goal, right? Because the goal is to make your prototype build. Let's not a demo, not an MVP, but you're trying to put together all of the ideas for your mechanics to create a build of your game that's all placeholder art, no audio, just basic mechanics, just to test out if your theory is fun, right? Your idea, your game idea basically is fun. That's your first goal. That's your first milestone, is the prototype. The planning, toy boxing, agile, right? All of that is just to agree as a group, as a team, this is what it is, and this is what we're going to try and build. Your rapid design, your rapid prototype, is how do we get there as quick as possible? And so with that, it's finding what feels good, but figuring out how do we implement that quickly? How do we make that modular? How do we make it so we're not constantly refactoring and reinventing the wheel to build whatever this feeling is?
Could we get like an example of something in rapid game design and then the same kind of example in one of the other methods? I'm still struggling a little bit with seeing the difference between rapid game design and some of the other faster methods of creating creating a video game.
Well, I guess here's a good way to think about it. Agile development, toy boxing, all those things, that's your vehicle, right? That's your mode of transportation, how you're going to go about doing it. Your rapid prototyping, like RPD, rapid prototype design, that's your fuel. They're not the same thing. They're completely different. This isn't another tool set. This is something that you use to kind of push through those tools so that you have control, right?
So rapid game design is something that we're using alongside with like agile and these other methods.
Exactly.
It's not a separate method.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a separate method. It's not a separate way of planning. It's just a way of thinking and tinkering and very quickly saying, is cutting a tree fun? Is it fun to cut down a tree? And there's plenty of games we can think of where people have tried to answer this question. There's games like Ark, where it's just, you just pound away on the tree and eventually the tree just doesn't have any more health or resources and it falls over and it's done. And then you have games like 7 Days to Die, where you hit the tree and then when it's time for it to fall over, it falls over and creates like a physics interaction in the world, right? And then you have other games. I
guess Rust might be one where they have like the little like target points that they added in. Although that might have just been on stone. I can't remember if it was on trees too.
Same idea, right? It's mostly the idea of interacting with the resource, right? But what we are doing is being specific, right? Because we're not saying, is it fun to harvest resources? That can mean anything. Is it fun to cut down a tree? And like, is it Minecraft based? Like, I think what you could correct me, you're much more familiar with the Minecraft scene, but I would argue that probably the most popular mod is to make an entire tree fell when you chop the base trunk of the tree instead of just having a floating tree.
Yeah, it's a pretty popular mod to do that kind of stuff.
It's a pretty popular mod, right? It's the same idea there. Is somebody like, is it fun to cut a chunk of the tree and the whole tree is still there? No, not really. In the mod scene, adopting that kind of a mod that gets rid of that is a very clear indicator that that is not fun. And it probably shouldn't be a part of the base game anymore. Like, that needs an update. But for like our question, Now it's looking at, okay, how could we chop down a tree, right? So our question is it fun, but like how, like we're coming into this, right? Blank slate. How could we do this? Is this a static model? Is this a model that grows over time? Is this a
So
model that has different
where
pieces
where I
to
think
it?
I'm still struggling with part of this is when we've talked about rapid game design so far here, all we've said so far is it's about getting something done as fast as we can and asking a question.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Let's pull back a bit here. So when I say getting something done as fast as possible, it's within the constraints of whatever tool you're using to guide yourself, right? And that's what makes it work really good with toy boxing, because toy boxing, you find something that feels good and you're going to chase after that as quick as you can, right? But you have clear blinders on, right? That's your agile and scrum, as you're saying. I'm only looking at trees right now. I'm not going to incorporate stones. I'm not going to think about resource collecting for shells or sand or something else. We're
So how
only
would
looking at
we,
trees.
like the two of us, how would we do a rapid game design on something right now, for example? What would the
Um,
process look like?
this is why it's hard, right? This kind of presentation is hard to talk about because it's not just a tool, it's just a mindset, right? It's a mindset of how to approach development is what it is. This isn't a like a textbook thing. You can't look it up on the internet and say, here's like I need to learn rapid prototyping. Like you're not going to find that. And so there's
Mhm.
no clear way to define this. It's just a set of like rules to kind of keep in mind as you're building quickly.
So what are
So
those rules then?
one is modularity. When you have a bespoke recipe, a line of code, normally, like normal prototyping, that's how you would code it. Very specific. If this, then that. This is the result. Great. It worked. Now, whenever I grab those resources and I come back to build this item, it works. I demonstrated my crafting and all that kind of stuff. And that's great. Where people get lost here, and this ties into like toy box I keep mentioning, is that they then say, well, I want to have an animation with this. I need a UI to go with this. I need something else to go with this. And if you keep adding on layers, right, chasing this toy box, you're going to end up with a whole system that's all based off of specific coding requirements. What happens now if you say, I need piles of leaves as a crafting resources, and I also need wood logs as a resources? Your whole system is not built to accommodate new crafting materials. They're built to accommodate what you originally scripted, which was like a stones and sticks. So now you have to go back and refactor all of your crafting recipe stuff. You have to go back and refactor all of your UI stuff. You have to go back and refactor things if you're not building it out that way, which is not great because that's how you end up with bloat, your project balloons. It's really hard to maintain momentum in the long term because you have to go through manually and keep changing things. And a lot of novice beginner game developers and designers will think that way. They're like, oh, specific rule sets. I have to make this as a thing I can set. So I set out an outcome. That's not great, right? You have to think modularly. So modularly would be I need a data table of resources. Column one is resource name. Column two is an icon texture, and column three is just a tooltip. So maybe something to fill in the UI just to say, hey, a sturdy material found on the ground. Doesn't matter, right? We're just thinking in terms of modular, like how do I get this out as quickly as possible? You boil it down to its most basic elements, which are those variables, right? When you put that into a data table, which is basically a spreadsheet, right? We can create 100 resources off the bat immediately, assign variables, put in a lorem ipsum script and all the descriptions just to fill it out if we even want to. We now have every resource hooked up in the game immediately, right? Now we need a system to compare resources. So in our next section of rapid prototyping, our mindset should not be, I need to prototype how to craft this item. We need to prototype, how do I craft items, period, as a system, as a mechanic, right? Now it changes the whole conversation. Now we're not looking to check the player's inventory for X, A and B to equal C. What we're doing is we're saying, okay, we need a resource, quantity of resources, plus a condition of some other resource and a quantity of resources, and that is going to equal a crafting material. If you put that into another data table, of craftable components. So for example, like a stone axe. Inside its variables, you just say, hey, there are three. We can code it with like an array index. We said we need three kinds of components. We need plant material, we need sticks, and we need stones. If you add an integer to something like that, you can put quantity requirements. And then you can build out every single crafting material or craftable object, excuse me, in your game in this one spreadsheet immediately. You can code it so that you look at material one, look at material two, and this is the required output. That whole crafting system is now built. Anytime you want to add a new material, anytime you want to change something, anytime you want to go in and be like, well, we actually need to balance for less stones on the island because our generation system doesn't spawn them very often. You can just open up your spreadsheet, change all those values immediately, hit save, and your entire game is now balanced towards that change. That's what I mean by modular. You don't have to go through every single line of code and be like, nope, this is now 3 sticks, and this one down here is now 4 sticks. You just do it in a spreadsheet, and it's super fast.
So far, rapid game design is making something in a way where we're trying to do it as fast as possible. It involves thinking about things modularly and in a way so that you can just update that and things reference it, so that you're not having to go back and edit and redo a whole bunch of different things. Why isn't
Yeah,
that just game design? Why, like, this just sounds like the better way to do things. Why is it
because
its own separate thing called rapid game design when it sounds like you're making it easier for yourself just doing it this way?
you are. But if that was the case, everybody would do it that way. But they don't.
Why?
Because you need experience. You have to keep running into this issue again and again to realize you have to think about this in a different perspective. I've worked with a lot of clients, funded clients who have released a game that's in live and getting updates, and you go into the code, and sometimes, yeah, they have old, I'm going to say archaic, but old systems that were built very, very bespoke code for how it should work that never accounted for what if we want to do this dynamically? What if we want to do this quickly? What if we want to change variables in the future? And so a lot of the work is just, we got to break apart this whole thing because it sucks. And what we need is a smooth, iterative, quick to make system that we can just plug and play like Lego to get the results we wanted. It's an entirely different architecture shift, right? Like mentally. What you're doing is you're building modular structure and deep core actions. So it's for example, looking at referencing the crafting material stuff again, right? Modular structure and deep core actions are looking at that and saying, okay, well, we only talked about like a crafting table, but in reality, for a game like that features recipes and things like that, what's the difference between cook steak, smelt iron, make potion, etc.? Nothing really. Like make systemically, mathematically, programmatically, whatever. It's all the same. It's basically we are processing these things. So the way to approach this rapid design early when you're trying to come up with these kinds of systems for your game, right, is you should build a function called process resource. You build that function one time that references all those data tables I talked about. You have every cooking recipe, every potion making recipe, every building making recipe. It doesn't matter if your game is if something in your game is craftable, it could be put into these different slots in the table. And functionally, when you say craft inside of a UI menu or your player does, all they're doing is running the code process resource. We are specifically processing whatever recipe the player has selected in their UI. But on the back end, your system does not care. You could add infinite numbers of crafting tables with modifications, and it does not matter.
So,
The
so
system doesn't care.
this doesn't mean it's all being made on the same thing. This means like if I have like a smelter or a skinning table or a pot on a fire, they all reference the table, and then they and then it goes back to it. So they still can all have like their own individual recipes, but it's just one table that's being populated with the information that everything references, so that when you go to edit the table or add things to the table, you're just doing it once, one time, instead of having to go back to different table or going to like into different crafting tables or however people coded the stuff to like start making changes and hope it doesn't break things.
Yeah, right. And yes, that is kind of like a layer of just learning basic computer science, like programming, that like you should think this way. Dry, don't repeat yourself is a very, something that always comes up in code. But we're talking design. We're not talking code, right? So as a designer, you have to adopt this way of thinking as a coder, which means you need to think about your design in a way that's easy for like coding principles. How do I make this so I don't have to repeat myself? How do I make this so I don't have to go pester the coder to be like, hey, I need you to finish that, I don't know, chemistry bench, right? You don't need the coder once this is designed on a technical level, right? To use these kinds of spreadsheets. All you need to do is just say, well, here's the model, here's the data tables. I'm just going to make this a child's blueprint or piece of code of our crafting system, and I'm just going to turn off and on what recipes are applied to this crafting recipe. There's lots of ways to do that, but in essence, you're just saying, hey, this is a chemistry bench. All the recipes that are applicable through a chemistry bench populate this UI window, right? That's a more advanced way, but
I got a chance to read through some of these examples but ahead of time, and I know this is one where I found it a little bit challenging to grasp it at first. Just in case, could you give the example on like the weapons and the guns kind of thing for like a character? Because I thought that one was also really good.
There's lots of ways to implement this, but interfaces and code is the easiest way for somebody who's like listening, right? So you would create a equipment interface, and all that does is when your player left clicks, you will say, I want you to broadcast a message saying item interaction 1. If they right click item interaction 2, etc. How this works is when you pick up an object in the world, you can give it bespoke code if it has this interface attached to it. So item action 1 could be shooting. Item interaction 2 could be aim down sights. Once you've coded those up to work with those inputs, you just create a child blueprint or a child piece of code or a child script from that weapon. And now you can tweak it however you want. Custom bullet patterns, custom weapon sprays, and it'll always work. You need a new weapon, you just duplicate it, and now it's its own subset, but you don't have to recode the entire gun from scratch every time. Mechanically speaking, a shotgun in most typical games compared to a regular gun is just like a spray of a bunch of pellets, which is just raycasts. In your standard game that does not use projectiles, right? Like physics based. There's no dropping. It's just I'm going to cast in direction, and if I hit an enemy, I did damage to it, or I hit an object and whatever that interaction is. So once like that logic is made, to make a shotgun, you just do that 2 or 3 more times, right? So it spreads out in like a cone, and that's how you do your damage. That's typically how they're done. There's other ways of doing it, but that's like an example of how you create the code to manage your raycasts in a weapon. And then when you duplicate that, you can change small variables that you've set to be editable to create different behaviors. So you don't have to reinvent the weapon system. You don't have to reinvent how weapons work. You don't have to recode the reload mechanic for your new gun. It just knows how to do that by default because it has the reload button, and your reload button is always hypothetically R. So every gun that you have has a reload function, right?
That's like that because it makes it sound like to make the new gun, then you're just duplicating the old one, changing some variables on it that affect like the reload speed or like the range of bullets, or I mean, I don't know, I don't really fully understand how that stuff works, but changing the animation, and so it's just like you're kind of it's like reskinning it and then tweaking it a little bit, and then that's your next weapon. And then
Yeah.
the other thing I really liked that you had in there too is it also mentioned that like the same method doesn't like it works for other things too. Like you could have these guns where it's like the action 1 and action 2 with the left and right, but then you have maybe the character has a sword. You don't have to recode or rebuild everything here. It's still, action 1 and action 2 that trigger the things that begin to happen with that too. And so I thought that was a really neat thing.
Yeah, and so that's modular design, right? So if you are spending any time as Unreal, for instance, you'll see there's a lot of things, especially on Lyra, where they work this way. It's a bespoke system. You just tell it what animation to play given the context of what weapon it's holding. It's just that like a spreadsheet, right? It's a data asset where you just say, here's your model, here's your special effects, here's your weapon audio sound effects, and here's your reload animation, and here's your character reload animation. And we're just going to throw this as being owned by the gun. So whenever I pick up the gun and I click item action 1, it's going to look at all that data and say, oh, this is how I behave, right? And then same thing, you duplicate that weapon, change the variables, update all those individual pieces, and it's still going to work every time. Super important, right? That helps you build systems that feel good versus mechanics and systems that feel misplaced, or they feel like they don't necessarily belong in your game because, well, they don't. It's the hard truth. It's just this one-off thing, and everything should feel like it's part of the whole. But you have to design like that. And for a lot of people who are struggling in this game designer role, they struggle to understand that. They struggle to understand that like it all has to come together. It all has to fit together. It has to be modular. It has to provide an experience. Your dopamine hit that you're aiming for your player, the fun factor, cannot come from a specific action like Outlast, right? You can't create the fun from having to press a button to squeeze through a tight corridor or a collapsed thing, and that's fun. It's not fun. It's fun because you're being chased by some angry, scary thing that's putting tons of pressure on you, and this is an intentional mechanic to make you have to go through that animation. But you know what? I probably guarantee that interaction system of I came up to this object, I pressed my interaction key, my input key, and it played this like scripted event is the exact same code that works with the benches, that works with the lockers, that works with the beds, any kind of object that you interact with, and it plays a bespoke animation that moves your character for you. I bet it's all the same system. They're all using the exact same inputs. It's just here's the specific animation for this prop.
I never thought about that before. That would be a lot of coding and stuff to put into game that I'm sure would start to bog down the game in the long run too, if everything that you go to interact and do has its own set of rules that are just distinct to it on its own.
Yeah, and this is slightly off topic, but QA, bug fixing. Ever play games and you see them fix something, but oh no, it broke a bunch of other stuff? This is that's a symptom of things being not quite as modular as you would want them to be, because you went through and say updated the crouching height for this one input system, but those other inputs that are similar aren't modular. They're not the same. They're like two separate code chunks. So when you updated one, this one is referencing pieces of the animation data, for example, from that were put into this patch. Now all of these objects break. Now you have to go through and figure out, okay, why did those break? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Look it's working perfectly fine. Well, it's not. It's these two things work nearly identical, but because you didn't put them under like a hierarchy, you didn't make them modular, you have to keep track. Somebody has to keep track of where all these things diverge. And when you think at larger scope games, that becomes really difficult. It becomes very difficult to try and manage and maintain, especially when you refactor, which is going back and updating code based on what you learned, bug testing, etc. You got to make sure that you know, okay, we're refactoring this tree cutting. What is it that we are refactoring, and does that affect anything else in the game? when you've coded bespoke, it's really hard to do that.
So when you first said rapid game design to me, and then you mentioned that it was about doing things as fast as you can, by doing things as fast as we can, it's not meant as in getting things done as quickly as we possibly can. It's about building things in a way so that we can continue to add on to it as fast as possible, might be a better way of putting it. Because
Yeah,
it's not
well,
about like, I got this code done. I'm just, it's not about typing as fast as you can. It's about, doing it so that it just can copy and paste or just, modularly everything adds on to it. It's just one of the building blocks instead of the building block needing all of this stuff jammed up inside of it.
exactly, right. But I like that terminology because it makes you think about it. It's like, what do you mean faster? And you have to think about this the way the way I am, I guess, as a project manager kind of producer is the only way to get something built faster is to reduce the time it takes to build each individual piece, right? So the whole point of this is in the early stages, when you are messing around with an idea, you need to think about, how do I make this as modular and easy to change for future me in case this is fun. You will never run into an issue where if I do that, it breaks the fun. If that happens, you don't have a strong design and it's not what you think is fun, right? Like, pre-building this kind of mentality early in your prototyping phase will save you in the long run, because if the tree's not fun and you're not going to go build these modular structures, right, cutting down the tree. So don't focus on cutting down the tree anymore. This is the toy box. Like, we got to a point where we thought it was fun. We built a modular system to quickly implement how to do this, which could be an interface saying, hey, damage resource interface, and then attach that to a tree, or stone, a building, doesn't matter. We take damage. Think like Fortnite, how you can hit everything in the world. It's just one interface cast, right? Of like, hey, I hit you, and then it listens and says, oh, was I hit? Am I an damageable, interactable, or actor? Yes, okay. I'll play my personal code, which is wobble wobble, and reduce my health bar, right? It's modular. It's repeatable, and that'll help you get there rapid, long term. Like, once you've found the fun. Where I find a lot of teams struggle from going from prototype to real, not real, that's not the right word. Let's say a more structured development. A lot of teams will either, two scenarios. One is they will take their prototype as is and use that as a foundation to continue building in the future. That's where we get a lot of bugs. That's where we get a lot of issues with refactoring. That's where the game gets just super clunky with the more stuff that's added in. And it's just really difficult to build out that system, right? To build out the whole game becomes really hard because you never started from a really good blueprint. You just showed up on a piece of land and were like, here's a bunch of building materials and look, it's a house. You didn't. It's a frame of a house and you're just assuming it's going to work. So obviously you have a higher risk when you do that. If you build it modularly and you plan it out, you look at your blueprint, you can very quickly tell, oh, you know what? Building this tree is not going to work. Building this building here as a blueprint is not going to work. You can stop, or you can pivot and say, we need to change our idea, or we need to change game ideas entirely and try something else. We're not going to continue this long term because we could see earlier. Now, the second scenario that happens is that teams abandon the prototype almost entirely. They'll just take the one or two pieces that were, let's say, like the magic that they found. They'll import that into a new build, entirely new project, and then you start from scratch because it's a clean code base. Now, often indie teams, when they're trying to build out a prototype to get funding, they do all kinds of hacky stuff. Like, this is very common. It's just, this is the worst side of toy box method, where you're just throwing stuff together to see if something's fun. You found something fun. You don't necessarily know how it works as a system or a mechanic. You just know it's fun. So you get your funding, and now now it's time to put on our professional hats and we're going to build this properly from day one. That's going to be hard too, because you have to take that system that was not modular, it was never designed to be modular, and you have to somehow transfer that fun factor into this new format that works and is easy to maintain, easy to build, has clear direction. And that's really hard because fundamentally you're going from like almost two different mindsets, right? So the whole point of this rapid prototype design is looking at what it takes to actually build out a prototype, like long term, into a full-fledged game, and just incorporate that into your early stage prototyping.
From what you said earlier about it being something that typically, though I don't remember how you mentioned it, but it was something about like someone who's a lot more experienced in game design is typically someone who finds rapid game design a lot easier. And I can understand and see that because it feels like rapid game design is something that came along only after someone had been developing a game for a really long, or developing games for a really long time, and was just tired of having to do this one thing over and over and over again. It was like, well, hey, I think I could make this easier, which is something they were able to do from their past experience. And now rapid game design, it feels like it's kind of the mentality and the idea of that being passed down onto us newer developers, but we're being kind of told ahead of time where it's, think about it modularly, think about it in a way, think about what am I going to do with this in the future, or things similar to this in the future in this game, and how can I make it easier for myself so that I don't have to redo as much over and over again.
Yeah. A great example I like to see with people I've like worked with or consulting and whatnot is customization systems. The amount of people who have built their customization systems for like your guns or your character or equipment, it doesn't really matter. They're more hype. The idea of it is always the same, right? And they have it set to, I click like a UI option where I want this gun or this axe or this hat. And then it runs a bunch of code to say, hey, player character, your hat variable is now this model hat, and here's its stats, and here's this thing you have to account for when you go and take damage, just as a hypothetical, right? One, that's poor optimization because all that information is going to be loaded. Like not only the stuff that you loaded at the runtime, it's going to be laggy. It's going to, if you've ever played player customization systems and they're kind of like janky and they freeze up a little bit and it feels clunky, that's why that happens, is we're loading all that data real time whenever we're looking for it. That also means anytime we're referencing that character in the future, it's also doing that same referencing to all those different components, all your armor pieces. So it's just not
That's a lot.
it's a lot, right? But you don't think about it at times because you're like, I'm setting a mesh. I'm setting a variable. It's not a big deal. It's like, yes, but is that being set every time? Is that something that we're setting for every single mesh? When we go from an instance level to another level, the player doesn't disconnect from a game. They go into the game instance, which is just like the game that's always present, and then they load into a new level. Well, when your player loads, they got to load all that data again every time. Like it's clunky, right? Not only that, anytime you want to add a new customization option, you have to add a new menu slider. You have to expand on your current UI to add option 3, which is a brand
Not
new
if you
mesh.
rapid game designed it.
Exactly. Now we're getting into the meat of it, which is rapid game design, where you look at that system and say, how do I optimize this? I already gave you the answer. It's data tables. You create a data table or data table, however you want to say it, right? And you list out all the variables, all the attributes, and you just say, this is helmet 1, helmet 2, helmet 3. Here's its variables. Here's its static mesh. Here's all this variables. And then what you do is on the front of your data table, it has a row name in code, right? And this name is quite literally helmet A, helmet Viking, helmet B, whatever makes sense in your naming convention. What you save, and this is the other part of why that first system is bad. When you save, we're saving all that data reference of all those models. So if you're ever wondering why you're playing a game that has any kind of customization or like toolkits, items that you equipped, inventory, and your save files are absolutely ginormous, it's because we're saving references to every single one of those items inside your save file and then trying to save that real time. And especially with autosave games, if you see they kind of like hang up after like 100 hours, 20 hours of playtime. It's because your Skyrim character's walking around with half the Skyrim and world inventory. All that stuff's loaded real time, like every time. Using the data table, you just save the string name. You just say, hey, here's player equipment as an array. Here's my head slot name. Here's my chest slot name. The only thing that's saved are strings, which are ridiculously tiny in code, like bytes.
And then
So
I'm
your
assuming
game,
it would be easier to add stuff to something like that later as well, where if you're like, oh, great, our publisher told us we have to add magic. So now, because they're funding it, we're putting magic in. But thankfully, we've got one data table. So we just add a new call. I don't actually know how it works. We add a column and now it's magic. And now we don't have to go into every single thing and add in magic. It's just kind of, it's there, and then we just tweak how the things interact, how some sort of interaction thing. Again, I don't know how any of that actually works, but
well, good working habit is to separate data tables by like systems like that. Like a magic system needs a bunch of variables that a customization system doesn't. Like the
I just
system
meant like
doesn't need to
with
know all that.
customization, sometimes
Oh,
they might
yeah.
have like a modifier that affects like you get like plus 10 mana when you have this hat on.
Yeah, and so what that looks like in practice is you have a UI window just like before. Nothing changes except when you click a UI icon, all it's doing is just reading the string at the time you click it, and it updates what line to load in the code, and it's super fast. It doesn't have to like load up all the data. It just grabs it whenever it needs it. So all of your loading, all your instance hopping, level changing, stuff like that is much, much faster, but also it's much, much easier to add new options. You just go to open up your data table, like you said, and instead of magic, it would be like, hey, we want a series of mecha hats, like robot helmets. Okay, we'll just go down to the list and be like robot hat A, robot hat B, robot hat C, and then here's the variables, and then we'll plug this in. And also this is part of our $10 DLC package, and there you go. So like
and our horse armor.
and your horse armor. Yeah, right? Like if you design it modularly like this, it's very, very, very easy to go in and change variables, and you're not going to break anything. Same thing with this is, a little more advanced, but if you are doing systems like that, you will run into issues where you've made additions or changes to your code and you break player saves, right? I don't know. Yeah, I know we've encountered this as players where you load up a game and your save doesn't work anymore because you haven't played it in a couple of versions and now your game's broken. Well, if you modularly design like a customization system like this, it doesn't matter what you change because the underlying code is always the same. We're just going to load whatever that data string, the data table is. And so if, for example, you added in magic resistance as a modifier for every single armor in your game, your character loading, your character save files are not going to care because your save file is Viking Helmet A. It does not care what that actually means. What it cares about is when the player goes to build itself, when it's loading, is it's just going to look at that string name and say, oh, I know where to go find this in the spreadsheet. Go down the list till we find that name, and here's all my data.
Now, I'm also
Here's my
assuming that
brand
when you
new-
say that solves all of the player saves never breaking, I'm assuming that's within reason.
Within reason, yes.
Yeah.
That's
Watch,
specific
there's going
to
to be
this.
the next game that goes and breaks the player saves. They're just going to get a whole bunch of hate mail. Indie innovators said you need to use data tables.
Yeah, well, actually, it's funny how when you show them various developers how that works, and then I get a lot of resistance at first where they're like, no, this doesn't make sense, and like this, this seems really weird to add this extra layer, and then they get it working, and then every time without fail they're just like, oh my god, like wow, and it changes their whole design perspective because then they realize very quickly you can apply that same methodology to anything, right? Anything in your game, you can apply a modular set like that, referencing a data table and storing those variables, and all of a sudden making updates, game balancing, UA checks, additions, even removing items and stuff like that becomes super, super fast and super, super easy.
So when
Whereas
you say
normally
anything, you mean like even if I had a game where I had like 5 different enemies that had just different stats and some different attack things, like that could all be in a data table too, so that when I added another enemy, it just references different things from there?
Yeah. Yeah, so as an enemy type, you would say, I don't know, right? Head crab as an enemy type, and then you just have a variable slot in your spreadsheet, and you could set all this inside of a game engine or through programming, right? And you just say, like, this is the model, this is the animation system, this is the attack 1, attack 2, attack 3, and that's where you put in each of your variables that you would create from like your animators. You say this is attack 1, attack 2, attack 3, this is the jumping attack, etc. And then you go through it, and you can expand that as big as you want to make it. But ideally, you would just make it mechanics and systems focused. So it's like, here's the setup for the character, and here's all its attributes. Every head crab has 10 health. It moves this fast. It can jump this high. It has access to ability 1, right? And then what is ability 1? It is a lunge attack. And then there's your character. You want to make a variant where it's like radioactive head crab? You just duplicate that layer, update the name, update the model, maybe change some animations, if that, increase its health, increase its damage. And the more modular you make a system like this, the more you can change those variables very quickly.
This sounds like something modders would also love to see in games that they're trying to do stuff with.
Well, a lot of modders do make systems like this because it's easier to mod, right? Like, I created this rule set. I want to go through and change everything. I'm just going to like change the referencing. So, but yeah, that's it in a nutshell. There is, it's creating a table where your foundational code, your prototyped mechanic is just learning, how do I read your data, and then what am I supposed to output, instead of coding a specific interaction for every single item. Right? Like, we don't, like, again, going back to our original survival game, we don't want to code interactions for every single thing we can possibly hit. Well, I can hit an enemy type, that needs a kind of code. I can hit rocks, that needs a kind of code. I can hit trees, that needs a kind of code. Because, and this is where the novice part comes in, is they'll think, well, I need an axe to hit a tree, so unless I'm holding an axe, I can't do this action. So I'm only going to make it so if I'm holding an axe and I hit stuff, it's going to check to make sure that it's allowed and then give me a result. That's super clunky. And anytime you want to add a new like, yeah, again, I'm just repeating, but anytime you want to add or expand on that, it just becomes more difficult. But if you just have weapon swings and you have a data table, where you could have a data table that's a resource table that just says, here's what's populated in our world, this is what happens when we hit it, like an interface call, for instance. Here's the variables that are affected by that, how much damage it takes, how much resources it's given. And then you can just put a little checkbox in there and be like, what can this be harvested by? And if you have 4 or 5 of them, you say, like, can be harvested with pickaxe, axe, chainsaw, fishing rod, doesn't matter, right? You just flag them. You could just check them as a bool, and then whenever you're using that object, it'll hit it. It'll load up the data table, reference its information, and be like, oh no, you're not allowed. Sorry, fishing rod, you can't harvest wood because you're not allowed. You're not flagged inside of your data. And so the code to swing that fishing rod at a tree is the exact same code that works for the pickaxe and the axe. But more specifically, it's the code to cause the interaction and know what to do with that interaction is the same across all your tools. Anytime you add a new tool, it just knows how to do that because you made it one time. And then again, depending on what you change in the variables, changes the outcome. But that's the whole point of the rapid prototyping. It's thinking about, after, hypothetically, I got funded, and let's just build that early. And if I can't build it early without it breaking the game, it's a very clear sign that the game's not, like, the mechanic that you're trying to do that to is not very good to begin with, and it doesn't make sense.
It's like, even if the game doesn't get funded, that modularity, it's modular. It's something that might be easy to implement in other games as well, and make that process a lot easier and simpler too.
Yeah, and this is a real powerful tool set for studios across the board, whether you're indie, AAA, in between, doesn't matter, is whenever you create a modular system like this that's not hard coded with specific references, yeah, you could rip that out and throw it in a different game. Your interaction of using an item's ability can work in any game. Really.
You could just keep making sequels, because you just take the whole modular stuff and you go, it's like, I got Blueberry Pancakes 1, Blueberry Pancakes 2, and you just keep going because it's modular and it's easy and people love the game and they just keep throwing money at you.
Yeah, but you know what? Now we're going to tap in this is a little different, but now we're tapping into what mobile game studios are doing, especially like outside of North America, where they realized very early on that the game has to be so optimized and small and everything else for mobile devices that we'll just keep all of these little mechanics and systems and you save them into a repository that's your studio repository. And then anytime you want to make a new game in the future, or you get a license, or you have a weird idea, you could go to your repository and say, yeah, we need this system, this system, this system, this system. We're going to import those into a new project file. And here's like half of our game built. We just don't have assets. We don't have
That's
textures
awesome.
or models or anything. Yeah. So like if you're ever looking at a mobile studio and you're like, how the hell do these guys, ladies, whoever, these people, how do they pump out a game like every 6 months and they're all really well designed and polished and they have a theme? This is how they're doing it. Is they're not just throwing
They've
away
already
all their
done the
prototype
legwork.
work. They've already done the legwork, but they did it modularly to begin with so that even if it doesn't work, they save it for the time that it might work later. And that's something that, yeah, again, not a lot of indies do. They think that every project has to be contained within the idea, the scope, right, of what that project is. But when you incorporate this rapid prototyping, this RPD, rapid prototype design, you think about it differently. You think about what is this mechanic and system by itself in its most modular format. Now that becomes a puzzle piece I could put anywhere. It's a wild
Yeah,
card.
because whether you have a horror survival game or a fighting action game or an open world RPG, they could all have an the inventory system could be easily modular between all of them because it's just a bunch of items.
Yep. The only difference between all of them is how many items can you have? How many items can you hold? And if you built your system right, you just change a variable. You just say player inventory size 3, 2, 1, 10, 20, doesn't matter, right? And you'll see the difference in games as a modder, right? If you ever try to go in and modify a game and changing variables is literally as simple as just changing a variable to be like max inventory size. I want this to be 50 and it works. That's a modular system. You built that with the intention of making it dynamic. You just change a couple variables and the whole system still works. It does not care, right? That's really, really good system architecture. It's a good way of building things. If you're ever modifying a game, here's a good example, like 7 Days to Die. If you're sticking with the inventory thing, if you want to modify the inventory slots to give the player more inventory slots for reasons, it's not easy to do. There's no simple variable that just says, this is going to increase to 50. There is, but none of the UI updates, none of the actual code to show that to the player updates, none of it is modular in the sense that all it did was update a variable. You still have to go find the other like 5 or 6 places where that variable is referenced and make sure that those systems know how to account for it. So in the case of like the UI, it doesn't read how many slots and build the grid accordingly. It has a bespoke grid. And you can't change that. You have to manually go in and edit that. And so that's an example of a system that would not be built modularly. Mind you, I'm not trying to pick on that game. It's what, 15-ish years old. It's older, right? It was made at a different time. But that's how as a modding perspective, how you can go in and see the difference in how these systems are made.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's like toy box, how it works, how this going works, fits well together. Let's see, how do you know if you're doing it wrong? That was one of the things we talked about. Because there's a wrong way to do this, and the wrong way to do this is putting everything in a single spreadsheet, right? You don't want a spreadsheet of like 10,000 lines because that's really no better. That's really difficult to use. So you create them based off of mechanics and systems, right? As modular as you can. You don't want a beast of a system that fits your game because you're just running into the same bespoke problem. You want to look at it as here's the crafting system. Here's the magic system. Here's the player attribute system, and the attributes could just be that. And it doesn't even have to be player specific. It could just be what does the player has as variables that we want to tinker with through game mechanics. That could be your health, defense, all of your charisma, stats, etc. That could be its own spreadsheet. And then you can have an equipment spreadsheet if you want that's specific to what different pieces of armors give you. So you don't code every single armor to have specific values. You just have it updated in a spreadsheet. And anytime a designer or somebody in charge of QA wants to update those values because they're like, yo, this starter weapon or this starter armor is just way too powerful. Like the first game boss is not difficult. They could just open up that spreadsheet, change a couple variables, and the whole experience leading up to that boss has changed. And it's all updated very rapidly, right? And so it's easier to do it that way. That's the better way to do it.
Because I'm assuming where things can go wrong with it too is not having planned stuff out right. So building a whole bunch of modular systems for things that are only going to be in once. Like if you have like a first person shooter game and you have one level where you're supposed to like pick up this item and then drop it off at another point. You don't need to, if it's the only level where you're going to be picking up this random item and taking it to another spot, you don't need to make that modular. Unless like you end up having other levels with it. But if you know from the start there's just the one level that has that one thing, feels like it's a waste of time to do something to make it as a modular thing.
And you know, that's really where we get into depth in design, right? So we've talked about building it quickly. We've talked about the different methods of approaching this early design. Depth is all about how far we take things, and a rapid prototype design is really good for this too. So a good example is to think of it as shallow or horizontal and vertical, right? The more depth something has, the bigger vertical line it has. The more shallow it is like a horizontal line. So if we look at some real world examples, we have like the early builds of No Man's Sky, where the only use for iron was fueling the ship, and the only use for fuel was to move the ship. So why would you need iron, right? Like very quickly, we could see that it has a very shallow, like it's got lots of uses, but it doesn't actually impact a lot in the game apart from moving around, right? Versus something like Subnautica, where the quartz you had to use to build the windows, which then in turn you needed to build solar power, which then powered a fabricator, which you could use the quartz to build submarine, which then you needed to go and get more quartz in deeper areas. So it has multiple uses. It's not just a one-time, I hit the tree and I got wood, right? It's adding more depth. It's here's a tree, here's a pine cone, you could plant that tree, here's some bark, and it's all built from the one interaction. So in cases where you have that depth, that's where this modular design is really powerful. If you have something that's very simple, like you said, it's a linear level, you get a package and you're taking it from point A to point B, the modular design doesn't, like, you're going to waste time building the modular system because it doesn't matter. Your system is packaged in delivery box. Like that's okay to have it bespoke because you don't need any changes, right? You don't need to make it dynamic. Where that would be different is, are there power-ups in the world? Can I touch them and they cause different things to happen in the world? That would be something that would be good to build with a modular system. So doing it bad would be trying to apply it to everything because it is so powerful. That's not
like
great.
Mario's power-ups, like the different mushrooms in the star. That would be a great modular system.
Yeah, because you could add any kind of system and it just affects the base stats of the character or changes their model temporarily, or allows them to fire off an ability, which the ability changes. If you have the firepower, it's just throwing a fireball. And then once you fire that fireball, it has its own logic to bounce and deal damage and whatever else. But that coded mechanic of using the ability is the same, whether or not you're throwing fireballs, throwing hammers, or doing the little cat spin in the recent games, or doing the raccoon tail spin. It's all the same system, but what each of those powers do is something different. And that could be set up with a modular system like this, where we're just saying use ability 1, and it says, hey, item in slot 1, what's my ability 1? This is what it is. Okay, I'm going to go do that now. Stardew Valley is another one for like horizontal design early. in its design, where like farming gives you money and fishing gives food and mining gives materials. Like that's kind of like the essence of what you did. Terraria, it did a little different, where mining ore allows you to craft armor, which lets you defeat bosses, which lets you drop a key, which unlocks a new biome, which contains better ore, and then all the systems feed each other. Like all that new ore goes into crafting new armor, and it's your game loop, right? Is really what it is. So having a good game loop is a good way to look at it. Is, can I rapidly prototype this? Is this a system where I can create, emergent behavior? Is something else we could talk about in a different day. But that's how you build it, is you build a system that reacts to different inputs and gives you different outputs. But the moment you're saying, if this, then that, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle to add depth, and it's going to take a long time to refactor and rebuild those systems. Now, like the No Man's Sky, Stardew Valley, like all those games have been massively improved over time. But I'm talking like very early builds, right? Just for anybody listening. And to make it less game specific, we could talk about a mechanic. Take horror and sanity mechanics, right? So in some games, we have sanity meters where if it drops to 0, you kind of just you die. Game over, right? You made a sound. Oh, I died, right? How you could take that and give it a vertical design, more depth in your mechanics, is as the resource drops, it triggers hallucinations, which is maybe your first system. It's like, where am I? What kind of system am I going to hallucinate? Maybe that's a auditory hallucination that causes the player to fire their weapon unnecessarily. It's like, oh my God, like what's that sound, right? Make them panic. Maybe it's visual. Maybe that's like the level 2 is where we add a model that doesn't exist to also have the same effect. Now we're not scaring the player. We're challenging them to be like, is this thing really here, right? And then if we keep degrading the player's sanity, maybe we add in a third layer, which is noise, where now we have the actual monster know where the player is. We just send out like a sonar ping, right? So now we've taken that one same mechanic, which is sanity, and we've given real repercussions for how that affects the player's experience in the game, right? So it's for example, it's what's that game where you can't see the monster? It always like goes black. It's terrible. I'm just forgetting it here.
I don't know. I'm the wrong person to ask about that.
This is terrible. It was so big. Anyways, it's like when the monster gets close, everything gets like dark. I can't remember the name. I'm gonna shoot myself in the foot later. Just be like,
I
ah.
remember that at all.
Anyways, it was.
It's not Amnesia.
No, it is Amnesia. That's what I'm thinking of. Thank you.
Was it actually Amnesia?
Yeah, it's Amnesia, right? Where like the monster gets closer and you can't see, and you need the light to like have your sanity, and you have to hide from it, and you can never see the monster.
Yeah. Right? Well, you can
like,
see it. You can do what I did and cower in a corner and then look at the monster and be like, oh, it's not as scary, but
yeah, but like the mechanic, right, was very linear.
I get what you mean. Yeah, the more you looked at it, the more your sanity fell.
Yeah, right. Like it had a very clear, this was the consequence. Here's the thing that's going to happen in the game. And that was kind of the design, right? Where you could take that and then go into more of the other realm, which is more like Alien Isolation, where it's like your actions, your behavior, how you're managing your character and their movement in the environment has direct impact on the rest of the game. Like if you're just scared and you're just super quiet and moseying along, like there's not going to be a lot of stuff happening. But if you start running and you start hitting things and you start throwing stuff, it creates the behavior in the alien to react and to cause different changes in pattern and how they're going to patrol and et cetera, et cetera. But the system is the same, right? How that's happening is the same. So you're adding depth to those kinds of noise triggers is what I'm getting at, right? So there's multiple things you could do with that. So adding that depth, first of all, gives you opportunity to create emergent gameplay. It creates the opportunity to get modularity out of an idea, and it allows you to verify very quickly whether or not something is fun. Whether or not your game idea is like on those two different spectrums, like Amnesia versus Alien Isolation, like that's up to you as a developer. But this is a way of like getting there quickly, is like, how can I make it as quick as possible to get there? Because Amnesia, maybe sanity is a simple mechanic, but picking up objects could be complicated. Maybe that's a good use for your rapid prototyping. The key is just don't do everything bespoke. Don't if this, then that. You need to build this so it's easy to change in the future.
I like that.
I think that's all I had to say about that.
This is
Yeah,
a
just
little off
use.
topic, but when you were talking about the sanity stuff, it'd be really cool to see more ways that sanity affects horror games.
Yeah, there's lots of neat stuff you can do with that. There was an indie game we worked on a while back where we used a similar mechanic for hallucinations to do client side only changes. So like
That's so
you and I
cool.
are in the same room, but I hit a trap that sprayed me with gas, and now there's a chance that when I look at you, I don't see your character anymore. I now see the monster. So
Oh, that's so
it was a lot of
cool.
fun because like if you're running through a trapped area and then you turn around and it's like, oh, there's a monster, and if you have a weapon with you, all of a sudden you're like attacking your friend, and your friend's like, what's going on? And he's like, it's right
That's
there, it's right
like,
by me. And so like
what was there was, it was like a story based one where they had stuff like that where like oh no. It was like on a ship and there was some weird gas that was affecting the people that were on it. Man of Medan, I think is what it was called.
Man of Medan. Okay. Well, we'll have to look that up and figure out which one it was.
Oh, the Dark
Um,
Pictures anthology.
oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. There we go. But yeah, so like there's lots of ways to use these systems to create gameplay like that to make it fun. We were working on a project a while back for just like a friend of mine. We were tinkering around with the idea of like a Dead by Daylight style game that had sanity as a core mechanic. So as you're playing through the game, as the game is getting closer and closer to the end, it starts to change the environment. So as you're running, you'll see like something peek out from a tree. Depending on your sanity level compared to somebody else's, you do see it or you don't see it. And then we had a visual layer, we had an audio layer. So like you'd enter in a house and then somebody would be like, don't come inside. And then like you'd freak out, but you're the only person who hears that in like this team of 4 going through this cabin, stuff like that, right? So that we could tweak it, and then we'd also make it so that the sanity value became trackable. So as you're the hunter character, you can see who has worse and worse sanity levels, and they become more visible to you. So it's easier to hunt them down across the map because our maps were much bigger. They were like a whole cabin in the woods kind of thing. And so there's a whole bunch of ways we did stuff like that, where the sanity also affect a stumble system we had. So like as you're wandering around, and if you have really bad sanity and it's dark, like you stumble a lot, and that causes little blips of like sonar pings for the monster character, all kinds of stuff like that. So once you have that system built one time, it's really easy to reference it and build consequent actions off of it. But all of those codes, like all of that programming, was all the same, like essentially with the same system. It's just what am I listening for and what am I supposed to do with this information? And then it was very quick to rapidly prototype that and then, build it out.
That's cool.
And yeah, so like whenever you're building a game, that's where you need to start is you need to figure out what are we building, right? Assign your goal. What's our prototype target? And then we should think about how we're going to build this out. What are our mechanics and systems to get there? So your agile and your sprint planning, and then your toy boxing. When you're just chasing the ideas to see if things are fun, you need to validate them with this rapid prototype design, like this thinking, this do not repeat yourself. You have to go through and say, okay, if we expanded on this, what would I need to do to expand on it in the future? Let's just build it now. It's okay if it takes a day longer to toy box that, if it means you get a modular system out of it in the end. And then that'll allow you to do all kinds of fun stuff.
Once we've gone through and made a bunch of stuff too, might not be a bad idea to look back and be like, okay, what could we have done modular so that we know better for next time?
Yeah. Right. And again, this is just one of those hard experience based things. You're going to have to do this a lot. You're going to have to go through it a lot to really pick out those things. But as long as you're aware of it, right? And more importantly, you understand this from the studio perspective, right? Because again, the innovators, we're trying to build sustainable studios here, right? This is the goal. We want to do this better. Once you understand this mentality of this rapid prototyping, and you understand the print planning, it would be very easy to create 3 different prototypes, have modular systems for them all, save them in your own repository, just a separate empty project that's just full of different ideas. And then the next time you have, like, maybe you're on game 4 where you're just trying to prototype something fun, and you're like, oh yeah, you know what? We could use that inventory system from game 1, and we can use that targeting system from game 2. And there was that really neat character customization thing from game 3, or that unique prop system we built. Let's just bring all those into this new prototype. And you know they're modular. You know they work right away. You don't even need to spend time building them now. Now you have to focus on what the part that makes this game number 4 fun. And so now you have that same time window to really focus down on, okay, the main core draw here, maybe it's the humor of it, maybe it's the art style. And normally when you don't have time to prototype that stuff, now you do. You don't have to code all that stuff. It works. Now you just need to come up with a really goofy idea and some audio effects. And now your prototype gets more and more polished over time. So as a studio, as a team, you're going to save that money long term. Like, you'll see it. You'll see that kickback in the future where it becomes easier and easier to build things and tinker with ideas. Even better, if you stick to a theme. Like, our studio only does dark RPG style games because we want to get really good at one kind of thing. Even better, because that means every system you make is going to be modular for that style of game. Every time is going to be even quicker to go through. I think that the only thing maybe I haven't talked about is, when you're rapidly prototyping, is prototyping the right thing, right? And a good way to do that is asking a question as a team. So it has to be specific, and it has to be targeted, like one thing that you're asking a specific question on, right? And it should be mechanic or system oriented. Don't do emotions, don't do feelings, don't do ideals or like politics, none of that stuff, right? Because all that's subjective. So a bad question is my sci-fi RPG fun? That's bad, because how do you even define that question? Like, it's not specific at all. Another bad question, is my story interesting? Even if you're building a story-based game, that doesn't really mean anything, right? If it isn't fun, no one's going to stick around for the story anyways. You have to figure out, is it fun to interact with that story? Is it fun to go through the process of picking a dialogue option and seeing a result? And if that flow just isn't connecting, it does not matter how good your story is. It's going to feel like a slog for your players.
I feel like with these questions too, if your question is my story interesting? The yes or no could answer it, but it doesn't give you a solution to the question, versus like something more specific, like can running be more fun if you have wings? Like, that's a lot more specific, so that the yes or no, when you answer that, you're done. Versus, is my story interesting? Yes or no, whether you answer that or not, you're not done. There's still more to figure out.
Is learning a story interesting if I can only pick the wrong option? Now it's different. Now we've got a very niche specific set of case where
that's
like,
actually a really
okay.
interesting question.
Yeah, right. So you got a great example is the doors. One door tells the truth, one door tells the lie, right? Or the guard. I forget what that thing, or I even forget where it's originally from, but it's the same idea. It's not just like, oh, there's a guard keeper, how do I get past? It's like, here's a riddle. What do you do when you're presented with this situation? Right. And so that gives you something very tangible to stick with and be like, oh, there's some meat here. How am I going to figure this out? Right. Another bad one is it fun to manage a store? That seems like it's system oriented, right? It's like managing a store. It's all systems, but it's too many systems. It's too broad. Sorry.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, right. There's so many systems and mechanics required to even test that. And there's so many ways to implement those individual systems. And like, is this a UI store? Is this a clicker store? Is this a cleaning simulator store? Do I manage employees? There's way too many things to think about there. So those are some bad questions. They're very broad. They're not specific. They're based in emotion. They're based off of like an idea that I'm concerned about, but they're not targeting a mechanic or system with like specificity. Like, we're not being specific about this thing. Good question. Is it fun to control a character who can only move by shooting a gun backwards? So this is kind of a ripoff of the game where you're Jetpack Dave or something is called. It's a linear side scroller game, but you shoot projectiles like fireballs out of your backpack, and that's how your character moves around the world, right? So your shooting game where you got to target creatures and enemies, and as you aim at them, you actually fire yourself. So you have to like manage movement and like
That sounds
physics
cool.
while also, yeah, that's a super fun mechanic. And I'm sure I'm getting the name wrong. I apologize to the developer, but right, like that's a fun mechanic, and it's a very specific question. Like, is it fun if this is an option? Same thing with my narrative one. Is it fun if I can only pick the wrong option? Right? Gives you a lot of stuff to work with, but it's very specific. It's very easy to build something around that idea. Another example is a vampire style game. So we can start broad, but then we could say fun where you have to aim and reload. We're taking the genre and we're saying, okay, specifically that genre is you don't aim like or anything. You just wander around, don't get hit, dodge projectiles. That's the core essence of the game, level up, etc. What if you throw in a gun and now we have to aim? It adds a layer of strategy to there. And if you give them a reduced ammo count where now they have to reload, now you have to be very specific of where you're aiming, right? So it gives you some more room to play with. You can get even better with that question and say, is it still fun if we have to stop to reload? What do you do in a situation where you have like like a double barrel shotgun, and you blast one way and blast another way, and now you have to reload, but in true vampire survivor style gameplay, you have to position yourself in an area where you have enough time to reload so that you can keep going, right? That makes it way more complicated. And so that gives you something to test. And if you test it out, and if that specific mechanic is not fun, there's really nothing else to explore there. You've gotten very specific with it. And you could say, no, that was not fun. I don't want to do this again. And it's like, okay, now at a very early stage, you can just move on, stitch it. If you built it modularly to a degree, you could keep the modular stuff. It's just saved in a repository. It's history if we ever find a use for something in there that we built, right? Another good example is it fun to cut down trees? Very specific. This is still a bit open-ended, but it makes it's to force you to think about the mechanic. How can I cut down a tree? What is the tree? We started with the tree, I believe, right? Like if we grow a tree and then we cut it, what happens to that tree? Is it fun to slice a tree? Is it fun to just chop one? Is it fun to just hit it and then it falls over? Is it fun to take the route of a lot of games these days where we chop it and like a little chunk flies out and we keep chopping it and that flies out like pizza chunks and then the tree falls over? Like
I
there's a
haven't
lot
seen
of
that
ways
as
you can
much
play with that.
lately. I'm disappointed. I forgot about that. It was a really nice thing to see.
Yeah,
Just made it felt like I was doing more than I actually was.
I think Sons of the Forest is the last one I played that had that kind of mechanic where you're like chipping away at chunks of it, right? But there's things to think about there. And then if you can make that interaction fun and you're enjoying it and you show somebody else the mechanic and they're like, hey, this is kind of funky. Like I'm enjoying this. This is different. You know that's good. There's potential here. So how do you take it further? Maybe, and I'm going to use an example from somebody who came to my talks actually for the Okanagan Game Developers Association, the nonprofit in my local area, and he took that idea of the cutting down a tree, and so what he did is he created a tube, a cylinder that just grows in the air, and then you can cut it, and then off flies this chunk of cylinder, like this cylinder piece. It was pretty neat. It was pretty interesting to see. Oh, you can like all different kinds of sizes, like super thin and super thick, and it could grow for forever. And then you cut it and it falls down. And it's like, okay, well, how can we take that further? Well, what if you're given an order? So your order is, I need the way you would at like a hardware store. I need like five-foot logs, and so you have to cut and time it like a rhythm game or something. It'd be like, here's 5 feet, and then 5 feet, and 5 feet, and how close you are to that perfect cut gives you a score. And what if that gives you money? And then what if your trees grow faster? What if you increase like the forgiveness cut range so you don't have to be perfect? And now all of a sudden we've created a clicker game all based around cutting trees and upgrading different things. that are all part of this modular system of like, I need to know that a tube grows and I cut it at a line and we're measuring that distance against the variable. If that's modular, all of those individual pieces we could upgrade. That in essence, like I said, is a clicker game. It's an idle game and they're surprisingly addictive and fun to just watch number go up. But
It is always
that's how
nice
it
to see
can
the number
start.
go up.
Yeah, that's how it can start. So yeah, asking good questions will help you come up with these rapid prototype and help you get through the toy box and just prototyping in general very quickly. So being direct, making it something tangible, system mechanic focused, building it modularly. Those are our core lessons for today.